Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about celebrating the good and hope in the middle. Join us as we discuss valuing good over perfect and how we're learning that the messy middle can't be skipped and is often where we learn the most. Let's get started. Listeners, today we're talking about celebrating the good and hope in the middle. As a springboard for today's discussion, we're using the book What If It's Wonderful by Nicole Zasowski. This book is about learning to release your fears, choose joy, and find the courage to celebrate in the midst of fear and disappointment. Nicole encourages us to ask ourselves, what if it's wonderful? And as always, listeners, you do not need to be reading along in order to enjoy this episode. We're just using the material from chapters 11 and 12 to think about and make changes in our own lives. And Julie and Mindy, this is not the first time this book urged us to celebrate the good. So what did you guys see different in this chapter versus previous times she's talked about this?
I actually kind of struggle with that, and I had to keep going back and thought, why is she repeating this? Like, there must be a reason she's repeating it. And the only thing I could think of was that maybe, like in the first couple of chapters, she was urging us to celebrate more like when things passively happen to us, maybe like, that she was pregnant. And this situation seemed to have more to do with things that she could take responsibility for, like her own accomplishments, her own giftings.
Oh, that's a good
That's what I thought, like that this was something that she had a little control over, she felt, and didn't know like to celebrate herself, or it kind of felt selfish to celebrate because it was like she was being prideful.
Oh, that's a good point.
I don't know. That's what I got out of it.
Right. And I know we'll talk about this later, but she introduces the, prayer. She kind of talks about that, and we'll delve into that more later. So that to me was another aspect of this type of celebration, is this relationship with God that you're still kind of learning, no matter how old you are. And also we know ourselves. And so I feel like it's really hard to celebrate when you're still sinful. Like you see all of you. And when it comes to ourselves, we've said it so many times, we are our harshest critics. So in looking at herself, she still sees the whole picture, and it's really hard.
Yeah. So even though we're going over this again, I think there's something new, because I think this is one of our biggest struggles, is to learn to celebrate the good. And we really do want to be celebrating all that's wonderful by the time we're done with this book. So Julie, why don't you recap for us, what was chapter 11 about?
All right. She has received a job offer for what she called her dream job. And before her interview, I think she was sharing like as a prayer request with a group of therapists. And one of them just stood up and said, "You've got this job. I just know you're going to get this job." And he kind of gave the big, V for victory. And she was kind of taken back, like, wow, like, I don't know that, but I'm glad you do,
Right.
And she was just a little bit surprised by how much he celebrated it. So her interview went well, and she said she was anxious and nervous about it, but it turns out she was offered the job on the spot, and she accepted it. And she thought, I know you could argue that I earned this job because of her skills and her hard work and her education, but she really felt like it was a gift from God because it was such her dream job. So she thought, well, if I didn't really earn it, I don't really get to celebrate it. But she walked out of the interview, and she decided when she left the building, she threw up her arms in a big victory V, and she said, "I'm going to celebrate it." So I think, I definitely could relate to her struggle, like her hesitancy to celebrate something good happening again.
I definitely can relate to that too. I mean, is it like our generation? I don't know. I haven't talked to other generations about this, but or what is it about us that we do hesitate to just celebrate with abandon? I guess I would love to just be able to celebrate with abandon. Yes, nailed that interview, got the job. Yay! I don't know if I would right away. I might have to work my way into that.
Also, I mean, it's not just about her. And so we have talked about prayer before, but this aspect of this was something she knew God could give her. She also knew God didn't have to give it to her. So she doesn't really necessarily delve into that the rest of the chapter. But to me, it was quite a crucial moment, because she had even said, like, they're encouraged to not pray specifics, when she was in this group of other counselors, and not to speak absolute truths when it comes to somebody else's life. And it's because you don't really know the mystery of prayer, the mystery of your relationship with God. But I've had times in my life where I knew God was going to do something. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I felt like he was saying, I'm going to do it. You can just rest and go ahead and celebrate that right now before it's done. And then there's other times where I have been more fretful, and I have, I've kind of wrung my hands, and I've prayed for it, and I've longed for it. And I just really didn't know. I was unsure. I was fearful, So I think that too is she's also kind of tiptoeing over, that mystery of prayer.
Well, do you think that our hesitancy to celebrate is a sign of humility? Can we kind of give ourselves a pat on the back for being hesitant?
Well, I love what she said. It was so convicting. She said, if we are trying to appear humble, it's like you said, Mindy, we know ourselves. So it's probably because we're giving ourselves too much credit. We're focused on our own abilities. Yeah, I got that job. I'm so good. Look at me,
Right. Right.
But on the outside, we don't want to appear like that. So we hesitate to celebrate. She says, the hesitancy to celebrate is actually a sign that you're celebrating the wrong thing. You're celebrating yourself instead of what God has done and given you,
Does this ever pop into your mind? Pride goeth before a fall.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes I'll check myself. I'll be like, no, don't get too happy. Don't get too, excited about that, because the next thing you know, you're going to be face planting in the middle of the road.
Yeah, it kind of subdues you. It kind of brings you down okay.
It does. It does. And I underlined this in the book. She wrote, we fear that rejoicing will shift the object of our worship to ourselves. Now I saw my hesitancy to celebrate not as humility, but as a sign that actually I have made my gifts and accomplishments about me. We don't have a perfect love while we live on this earth. And so we can't with abandon celebrate, because there's always something in our mind holding us back, whether it be fear, the truth of the situation, the truth about ourselves, or this unknown. And so, and we're always getting to know God. And also it's that, how much do I control, and how much control am I giving to him? Because we don't know what he's going to allow. And so it's so hard to just celebrate in the moment. And I had a situation this week where this came up, and I have recognized it in my own life as well, especially with experiencing daily journaling of gratitude. There are times, and Bryce and I were talking about that this week, there are times that I'm so overwhelmed with joy at what God has worked out and at what God is doing. It's almost like I finally have given myself time to sit and see and look and realize and take in. And I'm overwhelmed. And almost the next breath is, Lord, I pray you continue to let that stay. Or Lord, I pray you don't take this. Or Lord, it's this, we have joy, and it's like you almost immediately have fear. And I don't know how to get away from that. But we're in the imperfect.
Yeah, that's my daily life right now, because when I am just super saturated in God's word and his promises, and I'm reading 1,000 books all at once on fear and God's promises, and I can get so excited about his, oh my gosh, God has got this. I'm almost to the point of bring it on, God, let anything happen, and I just can't wait to see how you're going to take care of it and what you're going to do with my life. And then it doesn't take but a few minutes to all these fears creep back in, and because I don't know how he'll do it. We want to know more than he's giving us.
Yeah. So I don't think our hesitancy is necessarily a sign of humility. I think it's a sign of a lot of
cover-up.
A lot of jumbled up emotions and fears in humanity that we can't quite get over.
Right. I will say, if I could also bring up the opposite, that there were years in my life where I didn't have a whole lot of emotion, both anger or joy. because I tried to have such low expectations because I was tired of being disappointed. I was tired of giving so much emotion to the things that were difficult. And I wanted to protect myself. And I think we all go through seasons like this. I mean, I hardly cried. I just shut myself off. And that was really sad time.
Yeah.
I wasn't really living, like when you protect yourself, we've talked about this, when you protect yourself essentially from the pain, you're also keeping yourself from joy.
Yeah. You miss the lows and the highs.
You do. And I think that there are medications out there that people are addicted to create that, because life has hurt them so much that it's too painful. It's too painful to open themselves up to those emotions.
To feel anything. Yeah.
But one of the things that I did write down was, this is something that happens as we get older, but also it's something that I've allowed in my life, and I see a significant change. And that I mentioned that I didn't really cry much before. I actually even saw it as a sign of weakness, and I didn't want to be that girl, Yeah. Because girls are known for crying. And I was like, well, I'm not going to cry. So being able to cry in joy is something that I wrote down that's been a big shift in my life, to feel so full of gratitude that there are tears. There's tears of joy. And to me, I may not be jumping up and down and cheering, but to be able to feel the emotion so much that I'm crying and I allow it, and I don't see it as a sign of weakness, has been growth, progress.
Yeah. Well, that's a strong emotion. Strong emotions bring about tears. So you're letting yourself feel those again and acknowledging them. Well, have you ever chosen subdued gratitude over celebration? And what would subdued gratitude look like?
What came to my mind was like when we get a good scan result. Now, this is a little different than the situation that she used as her example, because this is nothing to do with me and John. It's more just God's grace, a gift. But when we get a good scan result, I thought, I don't jump up and down and give the big V for victory and celebrate. Like, it's this very thank you, God, and it's like, you don't want to get too caught up in that. Like you said, pride comes before a fall. Like, well, it may not last, and I don't know what the next scan will be like, and it just comes down to this very solemn gratitude, and I don't know, I guess, if realizing that God is the source of all the blessings, really all the more we should be able to celebrate that, because it really can be. It could be a kind of worship, a form of worship. And I highlighted that to Mindy, where she said celebration doesn't have to take you further from God. It could bring you closer if you acknowledge that He's the reason you're celebrating,
Right.
So I want to do that more when we get the good result, not feel like I need to hunker down and hope for the best. We just got the best news. Like, let's celebrate it.
Right. Yeah, that's so hard, especially because that you have to keep hopping the same hurdle over and over again. So it's not like, I got a new job. And in our minds, we think, well, this is probably my job for the next at least 5 years. I probably don't need to worry about a job for 5 years. You have to keep hopping this hurdle every couple months.
Yeah, it's like I live in a 2-month cycle.
Yeah.
I'll say anyone that's battling a disease, and I also remember just being pregnant. Like when I was pregnant with Jacob, those monthly checkups, with a baby. And it's the same way anytime you're having to go get checked out for something, or the questions always arise. And you think, well, can I celebrate today when I know tomorrow I'm back into the prayer again, full on, or can I celebrate this hour when I know that, tonight is coming and the anxiety is going to settle back in. And so it's really hard because it's not just once and done, it's ongoing. There's no assurance that joy will last. And so we think, well, maybe we can save ourselves from any pain if we tamper down that joy and subdue it.
Yeah, I was just thinking like subdued gratitude. Like I'm thinking like how the Bible says, be slow to anger. I'm not really that slow to anger, but I am slow to celebrate. What is that about my personality? The Bible doesn't say to be slow to celebrate, but I mean, I notice I'm slow to celebrate. It takes me a workup. Like, I've got to check it 3 times. Is this true? Is this something I can get excited about?
Right.
Is it? Okay, but like, I don't just go, bam, celebrate.
Right. Well, because sometimes I've seen situations where the celebration, like the good news didn't even outlive the celebration itself. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Right.
And you're like, oh, I don't want that to happen. Like this may be short lived, so I better not celebrate,
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I feel like we are all battling skepticism. And the definition for skeptical is not easily convinced, having doubts or reservations. And I think we're all skeptics.
Yeah.
We're kind of like standing back, like side-eyeing, like you said, Maria, like, is it okay? Like, is this good?
Well, life can teach you that to be that way.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't even necessarily think it's maybe our generation. I think it's our age. As you age, you become more slow to celebrate.
Well, I'm slower at everything.
You've had experiences where quick celebrations turned out wrong, so you don't want a repeat of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, it can almost be embarrassing if that happens,
I know.
Like, well, look at her. She thinks everything's going to be great. She doesn't know what's about to hit.
Yes.
Right. You don't want to be a fool. And let me give you a picture of a fool. And I've decided that this is okay in my life at this age. Also, as much as our age teaches us to be more skeptical because we've been through more, it also helps us live with abandon and not worry so much about what other people think. So there's that beautiful part of getting older. And so one of the things that I wrote down also, along with just crying in gratitude and joy, is sometimes when I'm out for a walk on our thread, which is our pathway through town, sometimes that's when I feel like I'm the closest to God, and I've talked to him about things and I've wrestled him about things. And then it's like, there's this victory that I feel like he's given me peace, and it's not, it's peace in the midst of whatever it is. And if I have a worship song on, I have to raise my hands and worship. And there are cars passing by.
They probably think you're flagging them down.
And I know, like, does she need help? Is she having a seizure? I don't know. But I feel that way in church sometimes too. And it's not all the time, but it's a freedom to celebrate who God is. It's a freedom to celebrate that he has freed me from anxiety or from fear, knowing that he's my only hope and that I can fully worship him. And so sometimes I feel like I could just soar away or run around the church and I'm waving my arms and I'm like, I'm in a Baptist church. I'm not in a Pentecostal church,
Yeah.
And it's just, but I wish I could feel that way all the time. Like you, Julie, like fully like, bring it on. God, you are more powerful than anything I will face. And I will trust in you no matter what comes. And
yes.
And then you go home and the next moment hits,
And the feelings return, not just the truth, but the feelings,
Yeah. Well, she uses the example of the story of King David's celebration. And I've always had a soft spot in my heart for his wife. Like, I feel like he was a little harsh. I feel like I might have done that. So, Mindy, do you want to refresh us on that?
Okay. So she tells us the story of King David and his wife. I think it's pronounced Nicole or Michael. I'm not sure. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 6. David is exuberant in his expression. He's dancing for joy and praising. And all the while, his wife, Saul's daughter, is watching from the window. And she looked down upon him with disgust. By her estimation, David's behavior deviated from the dignified manner of a king.
I always heard the story was just that, well, mine says she despised him in her heart, but I thought that was kind of a way of like looking down on his celebration. Not that she actually hated him, but just that I guess that she was embarrassed by his celebration. Like, she didn't want to see him get too happy.
In verses 20, though, she says, when he finally comes to her and they're talking, her words are recorded. And she says, How glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. And then David said to Nicole, whatever, it was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his house. And I will be even more undignified than this and will be humble in my own sight.
Well, whether we know exactly how she felt or not, the punishment was harsh. She had no children to the day of her death. She had that moment of looking out on him and despising or feeling embarrassed for his praise, and then she was punished. And I guess, I don't know if this was like a cautionary tale in Sunday school growing up for me, or if my parents used it as a cautionary tale. But as children, okay, sometimes you have people at church that get up to sing, or there's like a program that children think is funny, or they think that person wasn't very good. And I remember my mother like getting mad at me for, in quotes, despising someone else's worship like praise song or like their special music, or like, you know, as a kid, I was taught, don't you dare look down on how somebody else is coming to perform something like that before you. I guess maybe it was like a cautionary tale, and that's why it sticks in my mind. I'm not sure.
I wonder if it says more about Michael's heart. Like, she just didn't understand David.
Right.
She didn't know what he was experiencing because she couldn't.
Right.
Or maybe you think it's fake, and that's because you know you'd have to muster that up. You know what I mean?
That's true too.
Like
Yes.
you couldn't just do that naturally, but you'd have to. It would be a performance for you to do that.
Right.
So yeah,
I will say other people's worship, if they worship with exuberance or with abandon, it makes me uncomfortable. If I am not looking at the Lord and feeling that at the same moment, but if my eyes are watching the person and not watching God and not focusing on my relationship with him, then I'm distracted and I don't understand because I'm not a part of it. That's between the Lord and that person. And it happens to be in a corporate worship setting. And so there's so many times in church when we're worshiping. First of all, my family sits on the front row. I worship better on the front row when no one's in front of me. I'm not looking at anybody. And I do feel like it's just between me and the Lord. If I'm in the back, I don't really raise my hands as much. I'm too distracted by all the people. But I will say so often though, I have learned to close my eyes and just try to tune everybody out. Like I want to be in corporate worship, and it's fitting, and we need it as believers to be with other believers. But I have to close my eyes when we're worshiping.
So this question wasn't really necessarily about worship. We've kind of gotten off on this tangent.
We really had a whole nother conversation there.
I know. But I do think that we can do this watching other people's celebrations. We really can.
Yes.
And we need to check ourselves. Just because we might not be able to celebrate that with abandon, or we have our own hang-ups about it, doesn't mean that we should despise, and I put that in quotes, other people's celebrations.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I just had not thought about that in a worship setting or a church setting. I thought that was a good conversation because all I could really think of despising someone's celebration is when I see like a pro athlete spiking the ball in the end zone and like doing some crazy dance. To me, that's kind of disgusting. Like, look how full of themselves they are.
Oh.
And then they'll sometimes do the like point up to God thing, you know?
Right. You're like, are you really thinking God? Or
Well, I guess a lot of different things could come to our mind, but we definitely don't want to rain on other people's parades.
I will say Tim Tebow has been widely despised publicly for his profession of faith.
Well, that's true. Yeah. All right. Well, there's a lot here with celebrating things that are good. But then we also had another chapter, which I found more relatable in my own life, which was hope in the middle. So, Julie, can you summarize what hope in the middle was about?
All right. She was leading a 4-day marriage intensive. So she said she constantly has to remind herself and the couples that it's a 4-day intensive, not a 1-day, not a 2-day, not a 3-day. And she said they often spend the first 2 days kind of trying to understand the pain that the couples are experiencing. And it's not a very pleasant time. And the couples start to get anxious. They're starting to wonder about like, when are we going to get to the solutions? And when are we going to find the reason that we're spending so much time here understanding our pain. They just want to move forward, with the truth and get better. And her co-therapist often has to even remind Nicole, like, hey, this is not Thursday. I think the intensives are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. This is not Thursday yet. And she said, I know that my co-therapist really speaks with confidence, knowing like God is going to do an amazing thing, but it's a 4-day process, not 2. Like, we have to get through kind of the middle,
right?
Before we see the wondrous works. And so I thought, oh, this has so many implications.
Yeah. Just while you're talking, I'm thinking of like the Karate Kid, the wax on, the wax off, all the silly things that he's doing that he has to do before he learns to fight.
Yeah. That seem to make no sense.
But they actually come in handy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we all will answer yes to this, but do you struggle with feeling like you're never where you want to be? That's a strong word, never. Like, just do you ever, I think, struggle that you're not where you want to be or where you should be? In other words, the middle.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to be content with where you are if you know you're not where you want to be,
Yeah.
And I thought midlife in general is such a middle place. I mean, it's even in the name,
Right.
And, you're finishing up one job, one phase of life, and you still have a lot more years to come, but you don't know what that looks like. And you don't feel prepared, or you feel like there's a big learning curve ahead. And I know I just feel like this a whole lot right now. And the other day I got out some watercolors and some paper. I'd been with my daughter and she was trying to encourage me like how I could start an Etsy shop. And so I had built it up in my mind. Like I had made a list of all the things I could put on it. There's like 50 things, so I was going to come home and basically that afternoon, get all 50 things ready, in my And of course it did not go like I thought. I was not happy with what was coming out,
Yeah.
And so, and I think a lot of that was I found myself comparing myself like to this professional watercolor artist. And, I just thought, oh, this is not where I think I should be. And I just got discouraged and walked away. And I left that stuff out for 3 days, And, the middle is often like a lot of hard work and like, and I think I just have to decide, do I really want this or not?
Right.
Because when you have a little bit of an interest or talent in something, you think that should carry you all the way through. But mastery takes work.
Right. And sacrifice.
And so there's a lot of middle time there that I'm still
That's a great example.
Figuring out.
It is a great example. We've talked about this too, celebrating progress, being, celebrating things being good, maybe not perfect. It's hard. It's hard to celebrate when it's good, but you're not there yet. And so a lot of times that's how it is in any type of journey. But especially health journeys, people really struggle if they're trying to get to a healthy place, because you'll make really good decisions one day and expect immediate results, or like you can muster up enough motivation for maybe a week and then you've gained weight and they're like, well, why am I doing this? And it's just that it's slow change. It's slow progress. And it takes time of consistency, of sacrificing, of choosing a different way before you see any type of result.
Yeah. And you look at people's success and that's all you see. And you forget. I heard somebody the other day say she had worked on something for 4 years before it launched. It's like, it was just a good reminder. Okay, Julie, like you don't just complete something and launch it in, 4 hours.
Yeah, I was thinking about, there's really no way to avoid the middle. Like after my second child went to college, I was like, I want to avoid the work and the feelings that are going to happen when my next 3 leave. And they were going to leave within 2 years of each other. I knew it was going to kind of like be this big whoosh. All of a sudden it was over. So I started preparing, like reading books. I attended a seminar on the empty nest. I started talking about people, started this podcast. Was I any better prepared in August when everybody left? I guess, but not really. I still have to start on day one. And even though I had thought about it, I hadn't experienced it yet. And I can't skip over days 1, 2, and 3, even though I really wanted to be able to skip over. And I was sharing with Julie and Mindy, like, right now I'm in a really, to me, sad middle place. Like, I feel like as a mom of 5 kids, I was running this big cruise ship for 27 years. Like, I'm the main attraction. I'm the main captain. Like, I understand I have a husband, but I'm saying, like, as the mom, like, you're an integral part to that cruise ship, and all the guests are like revolving around you. And then little by little, they start to take lessons in their lifeboat. And then all of a sudden, one day, one goes off in their lifeboat. And then you cheer, and then another one goes off. But you think, well, I still have these other guests. And then all of a sudden, everybody goes off in their lifeboat, and you're alone on the cruise ship. And
it's a big cruise ship.
It is. It's really, really hard. And like, you can wave to them and you can go and visit their lifeboat, but you cannot live in their lifeboat. It would be completely dysfunctional. And I don't necessarily want to live in their lifeboat. I just don't want to live alone on my cruise ship.
Yeah.
And I was sharing that, like, my husband is in a place where his career is like really amping up with some new responsibilities, and like he's always busy, and like, so I'm wandering the galleys of this ship alone. I mean, I could make any buffet I want. I could, go and see any show I want on the cruise ship, but I'm all by myself. So I don't really feel like it. And I don't even know what I want to do. And as the ship's captain, I don't know what my next course is. No one sent me my next orders. I don't know where I'm going. And it's just it's a weird, weird place. And I don't see how I can skip over it. Like, I can't just burn my cruise ship down and run onto someone else's lifeboat. Like, I have to figure out where this cruise ship is going next, and I don't know where. And I'm also tired. Like, I'm also almost too tired to even think about it. Like, if you worked at something for 27 years and you retired, people would expect you to take some rest. They'd be like, go play golf every day. Like, nobody would say anything. But if you are a middle-aged woman, they're like, what's your second act? What's it going to be? And then,
what are you going to do now?
Yeah, it's so much pressure. Like, I don't know. And I wanted to share this little Insta story that I saw on my daughter's Instagram this week, and actually screenshotted it because I thought, I need to remind myself of this because I do this. In her screenshot, she quoted somebody that said, "I resist the culturally induced urge to push myself to dream bigger. What if this is my big dream? To do purposeful work as a pace that lets me enjoy it alongside my family as best I can. That will be my big dream." And is it a big, sexy dream that people want to put on a billboard? No. But I feel like I'm constantly apologizing that I don't have this gigantic second act plan. I don't know if you guys can relate at all.
Oh, totally relate. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I don't think I had ever thought of it in quite the way you mentioned it. So I'm glad we had this conversation that I want to skip the middle part. Like I know like that, if something happens to John, I may need to find a job. I may need to go back to work, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So I'm trying to figure it out now. So when it happens, I'll just be ready. Like I'm really going to want to do that. I'm going to need that time. Like it's in that loneliness, that feeling of loss, that emptiness. That's when you figure that out, not now. You know, and I've never thought about it that I am trying to prep so I can skip it.
Yeah.
Never thought of it like that. So, and you can't skip it.
No. And I was thinking about, in the season that my family is in, we're coming up on 2 years of having been here in our home and, repeating seasons for the first time in years in the same place. And I can't tell you how often it pops into my mind. Like we're in a very steady, balanced, calm. And it's like I was running this crazy speed for so many years that it's taken me years to calm down. And to just have the mundane daily and to be content. And no, you don't have to stress right now. Like, no, you're not about to transition. No, you can live your life. And it just took so much work for so many years because everything was new all the time. The people were new. It's like you put yourself out there and you're meeting new people and you have a lot of work to do and you can't just rest. Well, rest has taken years. And I still find that there have been levels of healing and learning how to be okay with dailiness. That time is this mystical thing that I can't quite grasp, but that it takes time in life for things to come to a point. And sometimes time seems like it's non-existent, and sometimes you feel every second ticking by. And so to be in a place of rest has been hard to learn to rest because it's taken an active work of not living in a stressful state in my mind, in my spirit, and to be okay with it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if this plays into it, but she also talked about how should is a dangerous word. And I think when we're in the messy middle, we start telling ourselves a lot of should questions, like you should have planned better and you wouldn't be feeling this right now. That's not true. You know what I'm saying? Or you should already have this figured out, or you should do X, Y, or Z because someone else told you that's a good idea, or whatever. We have all these shoulds when I don't know. They all they do usually is bring us down.
Yeah, I immediately thought that if all the shoulds don't come from anything good, they either come from comparison or maybe just feeling the pressure to do something someone else has suggested, or feeling justified in like, no, I know the best way, and feeling justified in getting our own way. Like we know how things should be. But if we're only happy when life is as it should be, we're really setting ourselves up for a lot of disappointment and frustration, you know?
Yeah. I think whenever I hear the word should, it implies perfection when in a reality, we may not have even known enough at the time. Like maybe I should have done that, but I didn't even know all the things I know now. So how could I have done that? Like we might have been too experienced, or maybe we were dealing with factors that aren't acknowledged in the should. Like maybe we were super tired. We had a lot going on. Maybe we were ill. Maybe we were fearful because of something that happened before. And like the textbook answer doesn't take into account the personal factors in someone's life.
Right. That's right.
So we can really beat ourselves up a lot. Well, what are some of the middle places other than just transitioning out of the empty nest? What are some of the other middle places that women might be finding themselves?
To me, when I thought about this, I thought about our role as parents. And we easily celebrate things that our kids do when they learn new things. Like think about when your first child took their first step. Now they're not fully walking or running yet. And you know that's going to come. But think about the exuberant joy you celebrated over that one step, that milestone. And we so easily can see that and celebrate our kids one step at a time. And so our role as parents is teaching and training and shepherding. And it's ironic because that should statement is in my mind as I parent older children, that they see your reactions, they know your emotion, they see your face, you know, even if you say the right thing. Like you're parenting, but you're trying to teach wisdom and they're like, you're already convicted. Like, I don't do this perfectly, but I'm trying to train you the right thing to do, or I'm trying to give you wisdom, even though I'm still a sinful creature. So as a parent, like you're on full display at the same time, you're right in the middle of this. Like you're teaching, training, shepherding, though you are not necessarily perfect.
Yeah, I thought about just altered relationships with kids. Like you've already mentioned, Marie, like you're more cheering them on from afar, and they've found other loves that have superseded your love, really. You know, like they have somebody else that's first place in their life now. I mean, a lot of women in the middle find themselves divorced. I mean, that's a huge transition of what's coming next for me, or praying and waiting on a child to make different choices, or illness, job loss. Like there can be lots of waiting and transition in midlife. For sure.
Well, we've kind of talked about how joy feels scary in the absence of certainty. But one thing that we know as we get older is there never is any certainty. So if we wait for certainty, then we'll never feel joy. But it is scary. Right. I don't want to set myself up for disappointment. I don't want to be doing what Julie did, like celebrating in the midst of celebration and then have the hammer come down.
Right.
Yeah, I had a lot to say about this because I don't know. I've just been reading and studying up a lot on this right now. But when your joy only can come with a specific outcome, that's scary because you realize life may not go the way you thought it should or that it would.
Right.
You get to a point where you can't post pictures with the caption #blessed. Because when life is going sideways, like what are you gonna share? So, I love the author and podcaster Kate Bowler. Do you know who that is?
Who she is.
Okay. Well, she really, really speaks well to this question. She addresses kind of the American Christian ideal that you see reflected in that #blessed. Like it proclaims, like, here is everything that's going on great in my life right now. And she said, while when we've all done that, when we give credit to God, like he's blessed us, but I think secretly we believe we are living right. Like we have the right kind of faith and we're getting what we deserve. Like, like this is the life I expect from God, all good. But then what happens when you don't get that life? Because Kate, she was 35 years old, a wife and a mom to, I think, a 3-year-old. And she was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 colon cancer. So I first heard her as a guest on a podcast, and I was so intrigued by her story because it was I heard the story about the time John was diagnosed. So I got her book and she said immediately she felt like none of her dreams would ever be coming true. Like she had the hope of a second child or growing old with her husband, or she had career goals. She wanted to travel the world. And it just seemed like her world was falling apart. In other words, there were no more #blessed life for her.
Right.
And she said she ultimately found that, you don't always have to wait for certainty on the other side to speak blessing into the actual days of your life. And I think that's just another way that we can say celebrate your life, In fact, her new book is called The Lives We Actually Live. And she said, we can find and sense God's presence in the life you never thought you would have or should have. And she just is really helping me to see that we still can have something spiritual to say about that's true about our lives in those middle days, like that aren't really Instagram worthy. Because, Jesus said, blessed are you at the end of your rope. Blessed are you who are exhausted. Blessed are who you are mourning. Blessed are those that are poor, and blessed are those who forgive people when they never even said they were sorry, or blessed are those who are left out and forgotten. Like, I was kind of always been confused by the word blessing, like how we can bless others. Like, what do we have? What do we possess that allows us to bless others? And she said, think of it as just the language to describe like where God is in your real life situation. Not in this perfect life that you wanted, but real life. And she said, like when we speak these truths over our lives, we actually start to believe that God is here in the middle of our grief. He can provide for that very specific need. And that even that he's just discoverable, like when I'm cleaning the toilet or I'm doing laundry or I'm caring for a sick person. Like, and then I think you believe that, and then you start to look for him in really ordinary ways. And I love this. She said, I'm finally free from the need to declare everything is #blessed. When you don't feel #blessed, you just need a blessing. And, because it's a hard realization in midlife. People find themselves divorced. They find themselves with a bad diagnosis. They find themselves caring for like an aging parent who doesn't even know them anymore, or estranged from children, or just feeling like they don't have a purpose. Like there's lots of ways that life doesn't go the way you thought. And we don't have to wait to the other side to find that joy. And I don't know, I just love, I'm not saying I agree with everything in her theology, but I love this message of hers.
Yeah. I read her first book. I didn't know she'd written a second one. I think
she has like list. 4.
Oh, okay.
She has 4 or 5.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that.
I do love that. And I certainly, like everyone else, find myself on those days, that I'm not feeling joyful. I don't wake up joyful. And I've talked about this too. I don't necessarily wake up joyful at all. Like it really takes me.
You could have fooled me, Mindy. I feel like you're always joyful.
I'm glad we didn't talk about this with our, the marriage podcast that we just did.
Does your spouse wake up joyful?
Bryce, not me. Anyways, so especially days that I am struggling, a prayer that I will pray that is very simple is, Lord, help me see you today. Help me have eyes to see you. And I do pray. I do pray simply that I would kind of get out of my own head almost, and get out of the dailiness or the grind or the anxiety or the fear, and just say like, Lord, I just need to see you today. And I promise you 100% when I ask him, he shows, and I'm able to see him.
He's
and
faithful.
I have testimony of his faithfulness, because there's days where like I want to see him and I pray and I feel pretty okay about it. And there's other days I'm absolutely desperate. And I say, I need to see you today. Like I'm at the end of my rope. Show me yourself today. And he has. They're just true testimonies that when you look for him, you will find him.
Well, that kind of leads into our last question, which is, how does knowing Christ's ultimate victory at the end of the story allow you to see your pain differently?
This is kind of a loaded question for me because that is not exactly what you want somebody to tell you when when you're going through something really dark and hard. Like it almost sounds like, well, life is going to stink, but hang in there because one day it's going to be really great. Like that can just really fall flat, even though it is true. It is absolutely true. But I think sometimes we miss the message that God does intend, because Scripture says it, for us to find joy and peace here, not just waiting on the end. And I love, we've talked about her before, Elizabeth Elliot. And I read where she said there were times in her life where she said she would have gone away in a huff if someone had talked to her about the happiness of heaven. And it was just really comforting to hear that Elizabeth Elliot could admit that she feels that way. Because, sometimes you kind of have your heroes up on a pedestal and think they don't think these thoughts. They don't. They could never say this out loud, but she can, and I can, because I have felt that way too. Like really, God, I'm just supposed to hang on till the end, till everything's made right, But she said, no, like, don't miss it, that he doesn't mean that we only have a hope of future joy. We have a hope here and now, and that Scripture promises it. And if we, can notice, like you said, Mindy, and believe what is true about God, then we start to see him. We start to look for him and see him in the mundane and the tedious and the sorrow and the grief, Oh, I think I might have left this out. What she said was, Elizabeth Elliot said, after she said she wouldn't want to hear someone talk about the happiness of heaven, she said, because the painful truth is some people seem to not only have heaven to look for, but they have all this and heaven too. Like, I think she was talking about in her singleness, because, her husband was killed on the mission field. So, she had to admit that to God, that that seemed unfair, but he's like, no, you do have that hope here and now too. So
that's such an individual choice to choose to see that. And even if you choose it one day or one moment, you don't necessarily choose it the next. Like that is a constant surrender of coming back to the truth and the hope that we all do have as believers. And I will testify that this is why we need friends that are believers. We need people around us that can help gently sit with us in our grief, because there are times that we just need to sit in it. And then there are times that a gentle reminder might be needed. And so just to have the loving relationship of knowing the difference and when that needs to come, with Bryce and I, when we were walking through trials together, we both had the same hope, but we didn't always feel it at the same times. And, and life is very daily. And so there would be certain times that he was carrying us, and there were times that I had to carry us. And then there were times that we'd feel it together. And then, praise the Lord, there weren't many times where we were both down at the same time. But I mean, and this is the church too, is what I'm also talking about. And so being in a small group, being in a place of other believers, to be able to have a place to go or a person to go to when you need someone to just sit with you and be there. And sometimes when you need that gentle reminder of the hope that you do have.
Yeah, that's a good, both.
True.
I like what both of you said, because when I even say that question, I think it stinks. It's like such a pie in the sky, not relatable type question, but you have to break it down and you have to choose it, and you have to look at it through the lens of the way that you guys have described it, because just to look at it on the surface, you're like, actually, it doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Well, and this is where the mystery of time, the Bible says there is a time to mourn and there is a time to rejoice. And just because you know that you're going to rejoice in the end does not diminish the need to mourn.
That's a good point.
And so I do feel like you can't skip that. You have to go through that so that you can rejoice. But again, it takes time and you can't skip over it too fast.
Well, and I appreciate what you said. Like sometimes you just need a friend to sit with you, to walk through that mourning and that grief, and then to always just point ahead like, oh, everything will be great, in heaven and someday, is really dismissing the mourning that you're in right now. Like that is true, but that kind of needs to come later.
Yes.
Kind of like the verse, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. Like that needs to wait, until you've just been with somebody and let them go through the dark part. And I think Kate Bowler's podcast is called Everything Happens. And she wrote it kind of against, like the title is Against Everything Happens for a Reason. No, everything just happens.
Oh, I see.
She just said she had heard that so many times, like when she got cancer. Well, everything happens for a reason. Like she goes, well, I don't want to find out the reason.
Right.
That is not comforting.
But that's not from a place of love. If somebody said that to someone who's in mourning, who's in grief, who's facing something devastating, is it loving to say that?
No. Yeah.
So I appreciate her educating. She's educated me a lot on what people really need,
Yeah.
Because we don't know. We don't know until we've been told or experienced it ourselves.
Well, there's definitely a lot here in these chapters. Listeners, if you're following along with us reading What If It's Wonderful, we would love to hear your thoughts. You can come and find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. But before we go, we want to do I'm a Fan. All right, Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
Well, I really had trouble finding something because I haven't watched anything new. I haven't read anything new. I haven't cooked anything new. So I did just this morning listen to Kate Bowler's podcast, and it's the newest episode. Her podcast is called Everything Happens, and she interviewed Beth Moore.
Oh.
And Beth Moore has written her memoir.
Oh, okay.
And I've always wanted to hear from her on that level, because I've always heard that she had abuse in her past, in her childhood, but I never, it was just kind of a vague thing I'd heard, that she mentioned. So this is her life story, and it's called All My Knotted Up Life. And so she's only done one interview, and it was with Kate Bowler so far. So,
that's neat.
So that might be a way to introduce people to that podcast. And
and
to
I
her.
will check that out. Yeah. All right, Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
Well, I was trying to narrow down what I'm a fan of. And I think I'm just going to go with some shoes that I love that's easy.
Yeah.
I do love them. So I actually told you guys both about these shoes a couple weeks ago, but I'm finally going to talk about them on the podcast. They're All in Motion brand by Target, and they are a hiking sandal. Oh. And they are super cute and super comfortable. Yes. And so they're in the workout section at Target, and they're perfect for this time of year. And so they go great with like joggers or leggings, but they also look really cute with jeans or shorts. And like I said, they are very comfortable. I bought these and I showed Abby a picture. She immediately went out and bought them. And so they're kind of a cream and white is the color that I chose, but they also had black and white. And so
I bought those, Mindy.
Did you? What color? What color?
I bought the black ones because they didn't have the white ones at our store, but I bought the black ones. Yeah.
How do you like them?
Well, I haven't. Yeah, it's been cold here, but I tried them on and I loved the way they felt.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the one funny thing about them, I'm not sure if this will work its way out, but they squeak.
Oh.
They have
okay. No. As you're walking.
Yes. It's like where the material rubs against this.
I wonder if you could shake some baby powder in there. I wonder if you could shake something in there.
I still wear them, but I need to work out the noise.
You're not going to be robbing any houses while you're wearing those shoes.
No. If you're trying to walk quietly somewhere and like if you're going to a museum, maybe don't wear these.
Okay.
But if you're outside, I'm telling you, I could wear them all day long though.
Oh, okay. Well, great. We'll definitely put a link to those in our show notes. All right. I'm a fan of a book that I read, and I went to look it up today, and this must be why I put it on my list to read. It just took a while to come in at the library. Apparently, it was Reese Witherspoon's book of the month in December. Oh. So it's called The Marriage Portrait, and a little synopsis of it is, marriage was her destiny, but death at a very young age was her fate. This is set in the 1550s. So, Julie, I feel like you might like this because it's very historically based. But anyways, it's about the third daughter of a Grand Duke who has to marry the Duke that her sister was going to marry because she unexpectedly died. And she has to give this Duke an heir, but there's a reason that she can't. And then there's this whole mystery around whether the Duke is trying to kill her or not. So it is good. At first, it was a little hard for me to get into, but then once I did get into it, so I would recommend, just as Reese Witherspoon recommended, The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. So I actually read this, but I imagine that the audiobook would be great too.
All right. Oh, very good.
All right. So we have a podcast, we have shoes, and we have a book for you guys this week.
Yay.
So you can do some shopping, some listening, and some reading. All right, Julie, Mindy, I always enjoy talking with you guys, and I look forward to next week.
Yes, me too.
This was inspired today.
Very encouraging today, and I'm thankful. Yes. Yeah. Thankful for you both. Thank you.
Yes. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
All right, goodbye.
Bye.
We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.